Poverty ran in her family for 3 generations. She ended it with one decree. Florence Scovel Shinn. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that no family pattern, however old, however repeated, however wept over by grandmothers and mothers and daughters before you, is stronger than one true word spoken in faith by a person who has finally seen who they really are. There is a verse in the Psalms that Florence Scovel Shinn returned to again and again in her own teaching, the 35th Psalm, where it says, "Let the Lord be magnified, which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant." Read that again slowly. Which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant, not the poverty of his servant, not the struggle of his servant, not the debt of his servant, the prosperity, the joy, the abundance. And here is the line that should undo something old in you. If the very source of all supply takes pleasure in your prosperity, then every lean year your family called normal, every scarcity your bloodline called fate, was never the will of the giver, it was only the belief of the receiver. And beliefs, unlike blood, are not passed down against your will. They are only passed down until someone in the line finally says no more. And today, in this quiet space between one thought and the next, you are being given the chance to be that someone, not through effort, not through striving, but through the simple, decisive act of recognizing what has actually been true all along. That supply was never withheld, it was only ever unclaimed. So before we go further, let us plant our feet on new ground together with words, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word is the wand that turns thought into thing. So say this with me now, out loud if you can, quietly if you must, but say it as if you mean to end something today. I am the one in whom the old story stops. Supply flows to me now and through me now. My word is my wand. Say it with me. I am the one in whom the old story stops. Supply flows to me now and through me now. My word is my wand. Again, once more. Let it settle into you this time. I am the one in whom the old story stops. Supply flows to me now and through me now. My word is my wand. Before we walk through the keys together, I want you to do one small thing that will mean more than it looks like it means. Type the words "God supplies" in the comments right now. Not as a wish, not as a hope, but as a statement. God supplies. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we make our unspoken word visible the moment we dare to write it down or say it aloud. And a comment section full of the words God supplies becomes a kind of chorus, a company of witnesses agreeing together that the old pattern is over. So go ahead, type it now, God supplies, and then let us begin. The first key is this. The chain breaks the moment you stop defending it. Listen carefully to that, because most people who come from a long line of lack spend their whole lives defending the lack instead of ending it. They say, well, my mother struggled, and her mother before her struggled, so I suppose this is simply how it is for people like us. And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop a woman right there and say, my dear, you are not describing your family, you are decreeing your future. Every time you repeat the old story with feeling, you are speaking a new law over your own life. The subconscious mind does not know the difference between a memory and a command. It simply obeys whatever is spoken over it with conviction. So when you say we have never had money in this family, you are not reporting history. You are writing tomorrow's check and signing your name to it. This is why the very first thing that must happen, before any technique, before any affirmation, before any prayer, is that you must stop giving your breath to the old story. You do not have to fight your grandmother's belief. You do not have to argue with your mother's fear. You simply stop repeating it as if it were your own law, because it is not your law unless you keep signing it. A woman I want you to imagine, we will simply call her the woman with the decree, grew up watching envelopes stack unopened on a kitchen counter, watching her mother's shoulders drop every time the phone rang near the end of the month, and she absorbed a picture long before she ever earned $1 of her own. The picture said, "Money is scarce here. Money is a source of fear here. Money always runs out here," and she carried that picture quietly into her own adult life without ever once questioning it. Until the day she read those words, "which hath pleasure in the prosperity of his servant," and something in her simply refused to keep signing the old contract. She did not scream it. She did not perform it. She simply stopped repeating the sentence, "We have never had money in this family," and began saying instead, "Supply has always been here. We simply had not learned to receive it yet." That single substitution, spoken with feeling, was the crack in the chain, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious mind is like fertile soil. It grows whatever seed you drop into it, whether that seed is fear or faith. And for 3 generations, the seed dropped into that soil had been the same tired seed of lack. But soil does not care how long it has grown weeds. The moment you drop a different seed into it, it begins, without argument, without hesitation, to grow the new thing. Notice too how ordinary this moment can look from the outside. No one applauded her. No one even noticed at first. She simply stopped saying the old sentence at the dinner table, stopped repeating it to co-workers as a kind of self-deprecating joke, stopped explaining her financial choices by reaching backward into her mother's story. And in the quiet absence of that old sentence, something new had room to grow. Consider how many small daily moments actually carry this old sentence without our even noticing. The joke at a family gathering about how nobody in this family can hold on to $1, the sigh over a grocery receipt that says some things never change, the resigned laugh when a bill arrives that says, "Of course," right on time. Every one of these small moments is a tiny renewal of the old signature, and every one of them can simply be left unsigned. This is often how the chain actually breaks. Not with fireworks, but with a simple withdrawal of consent, repeated daily until the withdrawal itself becomes the new habit. So hear this clearly. You do not need permission from your ancestors to prosper. You do not need your family's blessing to believe in supply. The chain breaks the moment you personally stop defending it as your identity and begin speaking, quietly, steadily, as if you already know better, because you do. The second key is this: you must deny the old claim before the new claim can stand. Florence Scovel Shinn taught a very specific spiritual tool she called denial. And she did not mean denial in the sense we use casually today, pretending a problem does not exist. She meant something far more precise. She meant refusing to give a false condition the authority of truth. She would say, "Deny it has any power over you," and then affirm the truth that cancels it. This 2-step motion, denial and then affirmation, was for her one of the most practical tools in all of Scripture, because the Bible itself is full of this pattern. Over and over, the Old Testament shows a people first tearing down an altar to a false god before they ever build an altar to the true one. You cannot build the new house while the old house still stands on the same plot of ground. So consider what this looks like in an ordinary week. Imagine a man whose father always said, "We are simply not the kind of people money sticks to." And the son grew up watching money slip through his hands, exactly the way it slipped through his father's. Bonuses spent before they arrived. Savings accounts opened and quietly drained. A pattern so consistent, it felt less like coincidence and more like inheritance. And one evening, tired of watching the same story repeat, he sat down and did something almost embarrassingly simple. He spoke out loud. alone in his kitchen. I deny that money slips through my hands. That was never true of me. That was only ever a sentence I agreed to believe. And then, in the very next breath, he spoke the replacement. Money comes to me easily now, and stays with me gladly, and multiplies in my keeping. Notice the shape of it, the denial first, clearing the ground, and the affirmation second, planting the new seed in the cleared ground. Florence Scovel Shinn was insistent that you cannot simply affirm your way over an unaddressed denial, because the old belief, left standing quietly in the background, will keep pulling your conditions back toward itself, like a rubber band snapping back to its resting shape. You have to consciously, deliberately, out loud if possible, cancel the old claim. I deny this has power over me. I deny that lack is my family's fate. I deny that struggle is written into my story, and then immediately replace it. Supply is my native air. Prosperity is my inheritance from the true source. Ease is now normal for me. This is not simply positive thinking. Positive thinking so often skips the denial and tries to paper over an unaddressed wound with a cheerful sentence, and the old wound keeps leaking through underneath it. Florence Scovel Shinn's method was more honest than that. She asked you to look directly at the old belief, name it plainly, refuse it its authority in plain words, and only then plant the new word in the cleared space. Think of pulling a weed all the way out by the root before you plant a rose in the same soil. If you simply plant the rose on top of the weed keeps growing underneath. This is why so many people affirm prosperity for years, with so little visible change. They are planting good seed on top of an unpulled weed, and this is worth sitting with a little longer, because it explains something that puzzles a great many sincere students of prosperity teaching. They memorize beautiful affirmations, they speak lovely words about abundance, and yet nothing changes. And the reason so often is that they have never once directly denied the specific old claim underneath. They have skipped straight to the flowers without ever pulling the weed. Consider also how this looks in the smallest transactions of daily life. A woman standing at a checkout counter, feeling a flutter of anxiety as the total rings up. That flutter is the old claim trying to renew itself in that exact moment. And she can, right there, silently, deny it, this fear is not mine, and affirm in the same breath, supply always meets me at the register. Small moments like this, repeated many times across a single week, do more to retrain the subconscious than one dramatic ceremony ever could. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the mind is trained the way any habit is trained, through repetition in the actual small circumstances of daily life, not merely through grand declarations spoken once and then forgotten. So this week, find the one sentence your family always said about money, the one you can practically hear in a parent's or grandparent's voice. Perhaps it is money does not grow on trees. Perhaps it is we have to be careful. We are not like other families. Perhaps it is something never spoken quite so plainly, but felt in every tightened jaw around the subject. Whatever it is, speak the denial over it plainly, out loud, alone if you must. I deny that this is true of me now. And then plant your new sentence in its place, and speak that new sentence as though your word were in fact a wand, because it is. The third key is this. The subconscious mind is soil, and soil has no opinion about what it grows. Florence Scovel Shinn returned to this image constantly because she wanted her students to stop treating their inner life as a fixed personality and start treating it as living, responsive ground, ground that will produce squash if you plant squash and will produce roses if you plant roses, but will never once refuse a seed on the basis of what grew there last season, This is enormously good news for anyone who has ever felt trapped by a family reputation, because it means the soil of your own mind does not remember 3 generations of lack the way you remember it. It does not hold a grudge. It does not insist on repeating history out of loyalty. It simply grows whatever is planted today, with full and complete cooperation. Consider how differently this feels from the way most people talk about breaking a pattern. So often we hear language like fighting the pattern, battling the old belief, wrestling free of the family curse. And all of that language, however well meant, keeps the old thing in the center of the picture, still large, still powerful, still worth wrestling. But Florence Scovel Shinn's approach was gentler and in some ways far more radical. She did not ask her students to battle the old belief at all. She asked them to simply stop feeding it and start feeding something else. Because a garden untended by fresh planting does not stay the same. It does not merely hold its old crop in place, waiting for you to return to your senses. It slowly returns to bare ground, and bare ground is receptive ground. So picture a woman, we can call her the gardener, who noticed that every time she thought about her finances, her mind would automatically walk down a very old, very worn path, a path that led straight to her mother's kitchen table and the sound of bills being sorted with a sigh. And for years she assumed this automatic walk meant something was simply wrong with her, that she was permanently wired for worry. But once she understood the soil teaching, she stopped trying to forcibly block the old thought, and instead began, every single time she noticed herself walking that worn path, gently turning her attention toward a fresh one, she would say, quietly, right there in the moment, that was the old path. Here is the new one. Supply meets me at every turn. And at first this felt almost silly, like whispering to an empty room. But soil does not require you to believe the seed will grow before it agrees to grow it. Soil simply responds to what is planted, consistently, patiently, without asking your permission first. So within a matter of weeks, she noticed the old path was harder to find, overgrown, while the new path, walked daily, had become the easy one, the automatic one, the one her mind now reached for first. This is the practical shape of what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she said we are gardeners of our own consciousness. You are not required to uproot every old weed by force. You are simply required to keep planting the new seed more consistently than the old seed was ever planted. And remember this especially if you come from a family where lack was discussed daily, at every meal, in every worried phone call, because that means the old seed was planted with tremendous frequency. So the new seed must be planted with at least that much frequency. Not once, not as a single dramatic decree and then forgotten, but daily, morning and evening, the way any devoted gardener tends a garden they actually intend to harvest from. Think also of how a gardener does not judge the seed by how the soil currently looks. A gardener does not stand over cracked, dry earth and declare nothing will ever grow here again. A gardener simply plants, waters, and trusts the process that has never once failed since the beginning of time. Your mind is exactly this reliable, exactly this cooperative, and it is simply waiting for you to plant, with the same faith a gardener extends to ordinary dirt. Consider too how a gardener understands seasons. Some seeds sprout within days, and some seem to take much longer, lying quietly beneath the surface before any green shows at all. And a gardener does not dig up the seed daily to check whether it is working. Digging it up only disturbs the very roots trying to take hold. In the same way, once you have planted a new thought, a new word, a new claim over your finances, resist the urge to dig it up hourly with worry or doubt, asking, is it working yet? Is it working yet? Trust it the way you would trust a seed left quietly in the dark earth, Say to yourself each morning, before your feet even hit the floor, "This is a new day in fertile soil. I plant supply. I plant ease. I plant good." And say it again each evening before sleep, because sleep is when soil does its quietest, deepest work, and what you plant right before rest often takes root the fastest of all. Let this become a rhythm rather than an event. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that consistency, not intensity, is what actually transforms soil that has grown weeds for a very long time. The fourth key is this: you can only receive what your concept of yourself allows you to hold. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that self-concept is the quiet architect behind every condition in a person's life, more decisive even than circumstance, more decisive even than effort, because two people can be handed the very same opportunity, the very same sum of money, the very same open door, and one will walk through it easily, while the other will somehow, almost without noticing how, let it slip away. And the difference is never luck. The difference is what each of them secretly believes about who they are, and what people like them are permitted to hold on to. This matters enormously when we are talking about a family pattern of lack, because what actually gets inherited is rarely a literal shortage of money. What actually gets inherited is a self-concept, a quiet, often unspoken sense of, "I am the kind of person things do not work out for. I am the kind of person who almost gets there and then loses it. I am the kind of person money passes by." And that self-concept, once absorbed in childhood, behaves exactly like a container. It does not matter how much supply is poured toward a person. If their inner container is shaped like lack, the overflow simply spills out somewhere: an unexpected expense, a bad decision made in a hurry, a generous impulse offered at exactly the wrong moment. The money finds its way back out because the container was never reshaped to hold it. And this is worth pausing on, because so many people work tirelessly to increase their income while never once addressing the shape of the container receiving it. And so the income rises for a season and then mysteriously falls back to its old familiar level, as though pulled by gravity. This is what some call the thermostat of the self-concept, set once, often in childhood, and quietly maintaining whatever temperature of prosperity it was set to, regardless of how hard the outer circumstances try to push past it. Notice how this thermostat shows up in ordinary moments. A person receives a small windfall, a tax refund, a gift, an unexpected bonus, and within days, almost mysteriously, an equally sized expense appears to absorb it: a car repair, a sudden medical bill, a broken appliance, and the person shrugs and says, "That is just how it always goes for me," not realizing that the thermostat, set to an old temperature, simply corrected the room back to its accustomed setting. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn insisted that the real work is never really about money at all. It is about becoming, in your own quiet self-image, the kind of person prosperity naturally belongs to. And here we must speak carefully about something that sounds dramatic but is actually gentle. Sometimes this process feels like a kind of death, and that word should not frighten you, because what is dying is never you. What is dying is the false, borrowed self that was never really yours to begin with, the anxious, inherited self that flinched at every bill. That self is not your true identity. It was only a costume handed to you before you were old enough to refuse it. And when that costume finally falls away, it can feel briefly like loss, like grief, like something ending. But what is actually happening is that the real self, the self that was always whole, always provided for, always connected to the true unlimited source, is simply being set free from underneath it. Think of a woman who spent years quietly believing, without ever saying it plainly even to herself, that she was the responsible one who cleans up everyone else's financial messes. That role had been handed to her early, an oldest daughter watching parents struggle, learning to be the steady one, the one who never asks for help, the one who manages, and for years that identity felt noble, even necessary, but it also quietly kept her exhausted, kept her earning just enough to patch holes and never enough to overflow, because her self-concept was built entirely around managing scarcity rather than receiving abundance. When she finally recognized this, she did not need to punish herself or feel foolish for having believed it so long. She simply began speaking a new self-concept into place. Plainly, deliberately, I am not the manager of lack. I am the receiver of abundant supply. I am provided for richly and completely. And slowly, as that new sentence took root, her outer life began rearranging itself to match it. Opportunities she would once have overlooked began catching her attention. A raise she might once have talked herself out of requesting became a conversation she initiated calmly. A friend's generous offer that she might once have deflected out of a habit of self-reliance became something she allowed herself to simply receive, and even the small daily gestures changed, where once she might have automatically picked up every check at a meal to prove she needed no help. She found herself able to let someone else pay without any flicker of guilt or discomfort. A small thing, perhaps, but a telling one, because self-concept reveals itself in exactly these small, unwatched moments. None of this happened because circumstances suddenly changed. It happened because the container had changed, and circumstances, as Florence Scovel Shinn taught, always eventually rearrange themselves to match the inner state. This is what she meant when she said, conditions are the outer picture of an inner state. Your bank balance is not first. Your self-concept is first. And the balance simply follows, sometimes with a small delay, sometimes almost immediately, but always faithfully. So ask yourself honestly this week, if I strip away every circumstance, every bill, every worry, who do I actually believe I am underneath it all? And if the honest answer sounds anything like the old family story, gently, without drama, without force, begin speaking the truer identity in its place. I am the one who was always meant to overflow. I am the one the source delights to prosper. My word is my wand. And let that identity, spoken steadily, become the new container your supply is finally free to fill. The fifth key is this. There is such a thing as the right idea, and it is always available, waiting to be received. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that behind every situation there exists what she called the divine idea, the perfect solution already complete, already whole, already present in the mind of the true source. And our work is never to manufacture supply through sheer effort, but simply to become receptive enough to receive the idea that is already there waiting for us. This reframes the entire conversation about money in the most freeing way possible, because so many people who come from generations of lack develop an exhausting relationship with effort. They believe, quietly, that they must work twice as hard as everyone else, simply to arrive at an ordinary result, that supply must be wrestled out of a stingy universe through sheer grinding force, and this belief, however sincere, however admirable it looks from the outside, actually blocks the very receptivity that lets right ideas flow in, because a mind clenched in effort and worry is a mind too noisy to hear the quiet idea trying to reach it. Consider a man who spent years working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, not because the ideas were poor, but because he simply did not believe supply could arrive any other way. Exhaustion had become, without his noticing, a kind of proof to himself that he deserved whatever came his way, as though suffering were the toll he had to pay before he was allowed any good thing. And one ordinary afternoon, sitting quietly for once instead of rushing between jobs, An idea arrived. Simple, almost embarrassingly obvious once he saw it. A small adjustment to a skill he already had, offered to people he already knew, that within a matter of months brought in more than both of his exhausting jobs combined. The idea had likely been available to him for years. But a mind constantly straining could not hear it. It took one quiet afternoon of actual stillness for it to land. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn taught her students to pray specifically for right ideas rather than simply praying for money, because money is only ever the outer form. The idea is the substance. Praying, "Let me not miss my right idea today," opens a kind of listening in the mind that ordinary striving actually closes. And this listening is not passive. It does not mean sitting back and waiting for supply to simply appear without any action on your part. It means becoming quiet enough, unclenched enough, faithful enough to recognize the idea when it arrives, and then acting on it promptly and without hesitation, because an idea recognized but not acted upon is like a seed left sitting on top of the soil instead of planted into it. It will not grow, no matter how good the seed was. So build into your days a small pocket of genuine quiet, even 5 minutes, where you simply say, "Source of all supply, show me my right idea today," and then actually listen. Notice what small nudge arrives. The phone call you feel drawn to make, the person you feel drawn to speak with, the door that quietly opens that you almost talked yourself out of walking through. These are so often the disguised form the right idea takes, arriving not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet suggestion easily dismissed by a busy, anxious mind. And this is especially important for anyone breaking a family pattern of struggle, because struggle trains a person to distrust ease, to feel suspicious of anything that arrives without great effort. A person raised in scarcity often unconsciously sabotages an easy solution simply because it does not feel like it was earned properly. Imagine a woman offered a straightforward, well-paying opportunity that required far less effort than she was accustomed to, and imagine the strange discomfort she felt accepting it, a nagging sense that it could not possibly be legitimate if it did not exhaust her the way work always had before. This discomfort is not wisdom, it is simply the old family thermostat resisting a temperature it has never experienced. And the remedy is not to manufacture unnecessary struggle to make the opportunity feel earned. The remedy is to speak plainly. Ease is allowed. Ease is in fact the natural order of supply, and I welcome it without suspicion. Florence Scovel Shinn was clear. Ease is not a sign that something is wrong. Ease is very often the signature of a right idea, working exactly as it was designed to work. And she would remind her students often that the source of supply is not stingy, is not slow, is not reluctant. The source is instead endlessly generous and endlessly inventive, forever offering fresh ideas to any mind, quiet enough to receive them. So let your prayer this week be simple and specific, not a general plea for more money, but a direct request. Show me the idea. And then, when it comes, however small, however unassuming, however unlike what you expected, act on it promptly and in faith. The sixth key is this: forgiveness toward your family is not sentiment, it is spiritual plumbing. Florence Scovel Shinn taught, plainly and often, that unforgiveness is one of the most common hidden blocks to supply, more common by far than most people realize. Because resentment, even the quiet kind, even the kind so old it no longer feels like anger but simply feels like fact, keeps a person energetically bound to the very condition they resent. This matters enormously here, because breaking a generational pattern of lack often requires looking honestly at feelings toward the very people who passed that pattern down, and it is entirely natural, entirely human, to feel some quiet resentment toward a parent or grandparent whose fear or poor decisions shaped years of your own struggle. But Florence Scovel Shinn would gently insist that carrying this resentment forward does not punish them, it only continues binding you to the very pattern you are trying to leave. Think of resentment as a rope, and notice that a rope, by its very nature, connects two things. So long as you hold tightly to resentment toward the family pattern, you remain roped to it, tugged back toward it, however unconsciously. And this tug shows up in the smallest of places, in the way a person flinches at a bill even when they can easily afford it, in the way a person feels a flash of old anger when a parent offers financial advice, in the way a person overspends or underspends in some strange unconscious echo of exactly what they swore they would never repeat. This is why she taught a very specific kind of forgiveness work, not the kind that pretends nothing painful happened, not the kind that forces a false, brittle smile over real wounds, but the kind that says plainly, I see clearly what happened. I no longer require it to control my present. I release you, and I release myself. Consider a woman who carried quiet resentment toward her father for decisions made decades earlier, decisions that had genuinely cost the family financially and left a lasting mark on her own relationship with money. She had every reasonable justification for her resentment. No one would have argued the feeling was unfair. But she noticed something curious. Every time she sat down to do any kind of prosperity work, any affirmation, any planning, a low hum of old anger would rise up, almost automatically, and quietly undercut the whole effort. It was as though a part of her refused to let money flow freely as long as her father's failure remained unforgiven in her heart. So she began a very simple daily practice, speaking, at first through gritted teeth, and later with genuine ease. I forgive my father completely. I release him from my judgment. I release myself from carrying this resentment any further. And she found, somewhat to her surprise, that this forgiveness did not require excusing what had happened. It simply required no longer using it as fuel. And as the resentment loosened its grip, she noticed her own relationship with money loosening its grip too. Decisions that had once felt fearful began to feel calmer. Opportunities that had once felt suspicious began to feel welcome. And even her actual relationship with her father, strained for years, softened in ways she had not anticipated, because forgiveness, once genuine, tends to heal far more than the single wound it was aimed at. Notice also how forgiveness sometimes needs to be extended not only backward to a parent, but sideways, to a sibling who seemed to inherit an easier portion, to a spouse's family who never seemed to struggle the way yours did. Comparison of this kind quietly breeds its own resentment, a resentment that says, why did they receive so easily what my family had to fight for, and this too must be released? Because comparison, like resentment toward a parent, keeps attention fixed on lack rather than on the abundant supply available equally to everyone willing to claim it. This is the spiritual plumbing Florence Scovel Shinn spoke of. Resentment clogs the pipe. Forgiveness clears it, not because the source of supply is petty and withholds good from angry people, but because an angry, gripped, resentful state is simply not a receptive state, and supply, like water, always flows toward openness and never toward a clenched fist. And it is worth adding here that forgiveness sometimes must be extended not only to a parent or grandparent, but to yourself, for every year you spent believing the old story, for every decision made from fear rather than faith. Self-forgiveness clears its own kind of blockage. So speak this too. I forgive myself for believing the old story so long. I release myself from that old identity completely. So if there is a parent, a grandparent, a family story you still feel a flicker of anger toward when you think of your own financial history, consider speaking this quietly today. I forgive completely. I release the old pattern and the people bound up in it. I bless them and I release myself. And notice, gently, how much lighter the whole subject of money begins to feel once that rope is finally set down. The seventh key is this: gratitude is the multiplier that turns a little supply into a great deal of supply. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that gratitude is not simply good manners toward the universe, it is an actual spiritual mechanism, a law as real and as consistent as any law of physics. Whatever is genuinely thanked for tends to increase, and whatever is complained about tends to contract. And this matters enormously for anyone raised in a household where money was discussed mostly through the language of complaint. Not enough this month, always something extra to pay, never quite enough left over, because that language, however understandable, however grounded in real difficulty, trains a family's collective attention to focus entirely on lack. And attention is a kind of nourishment. Whatever receives your attention receives your energy and grows accordingly. So a household that speaks daily about what is missing is, without meaning to, feeding the very shortage it fears. Florence Scovel Shinn's answer to this was not to deny real difficulty or pretend a shortage does not exist, but to deliberately, consistently redirect attention toward whatever supply is already present, however small it appears, and to thank for it out loud, specifically, by name. Consider a man breaking a long family habit of financial complaint, who began a very small practice. Each evening, no matter how the day had gone, he would name 3 specific things related to money that had gone well, not vaguely, but specifically. Thank you that the electric bill was paid in full and on time. Thank you for the unexpected small refund that arrived today. Thank you for the meal that was affordable and satisfying. And at first, this felt almost trivial against the backdrop of larger worries. But he noticed something within weeks. His attention itself was shifting. He was beginning to notice small evidences of supply throughout each day that he had simply overlooked before, because he was now looking for them. And this shift in attention did something remarkable. It began attracting more of exactly what it noticed. This is what Florence Scovel Shinn meant when she taught that gratitude is a magnet, not merely a mood. Thanking specifically for what is already present opens a channel that vague complaint keeps firmly shut. And this is especially powerful medicine against a generational pattern. Because if a family has spent decades speaking the language of lack around every kitchen table, then a household that begins speaking specific, detailed gratitude around that same table is doing something genuinely new, planting a genuinely new seed in soil that has never grown this particular crop before. Imagine what it might mean for the next generation entirely. A child growing up, hearing not that money is scarce and frightening, but hearing, spoken plainly at dinner, "Thank you for this meal. Thank you for this roof. Thank you for the supply that met us again today." That child absorbs an entirely different picture than the one you may have absorbed. And this is how a pattern that ran for 3 generations can, in the very next generation, simply stop running. Notice, too, that gratitude works even in the middle of genuine difficulty. A woman facing a stack of bills she does not yet know how she will cover can still, honestly, thank for the roof currently over her head, thank for the meal currently on her table, thank for the ideas already quietly forming toward a solution. This is not denial of the difficulty. It is simply refusing to let the difficulty be the only thing spoken over the situation. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that even in the middle of a shortage, there is always some supply present to be thanked for. and thanking for that present supply, however modest, is what opens the door for greater supply to follow. So consider building this into your own evenings. No matter how small the day's supply seemed, name it specifically and thank for it out loud. Thank you for this exact provision. Thank you for this door that opened. Thank you for this bill that was paid. And watch, patiently, faithfully, as the specific thanks become specific increase. Because Florence Scovel Shinn was certain of this law, gratitude is the surest way to more. The eighth key is this: struggle is not what brings supply, non-resistance is, and this may be the single hardest teaching for anyone raised in a family where struggle was worn almost like a badge of honor, where hard work was treated as the only respectable path to anything, and where ease, whenever it appeared, was met with suspicion rather than welcome. Florence Scovel Shinn taught something quite countercultural here. She taught that supply flows most freely, not through clenched effort, but through a relaxed, trusting, non-resistant state. She pointed again and again to the natural world for evidence of this. A river does not strain to reach the sea. It simply flows along the path of least resistance and arrives exactly where it is meant to arrive. A seed does not force itself into a plant through anxious effort. It simply rests in fertile soil and unfolds according to its nature. This does not mean action is unnecessary. Florence Scovel Shinn was never a teacher of passivity. She was clear that right ideas must be acted upon promptly, but she distinguished sharply between inspired action, which flows easily, and often even joyfully from a right idea, and effortful struggle, which comes from fear, and from the belief that supply must be forced or wrestled into existence against resistance. Consider a family in which every single member, for as long as anyone could remember, believed that money only came through exhausting struggle, long hours, clenched jaws, constant worry, even in the midst of relative sufficiency. And one member of that family began to notice something uncomfortable. Even when supply did arrive, it never felt like relief. It felt like the beginning of the next worry, because the family pattern was not simply a shortage of money. It was a permanent inner state of resistance that no amount of money ever actually satisfied. And this is a subtle but crucial point, because sometimes the pattern is not a literal absence of money at all. Sometimes there is money, and still there is dread, still there is grasping, still there is a bracing for the next disaster. And this too is a form of the same generational lack, only wearing a different coat. So she began, very deliberately, practicing what Florence Scovel Shinn called letting go, and letting the source of supply work through her, rather than against imagined resistance. This looked, in practice, like catching herself mid-clench, mid-worry, and consciously softening, breathing, saying quietly, "I release this into the hands of infinite supply. I do my part with ease and I trust the outcome." And at first this felt almost irresponsible, as though relaxing even slightly might cause everything to collapse. But she found, again and again, that the opposite was true. Solutions arrived more easily when she was not gripping so tightly. Opportunities appeared in relaxed conversations rather than anxious ones, and slowly her whole relationship to earning and receiving softened from a clenched fist into an open hand. And she began to notice, almost with astonishment, that the moments of greatest ease in her life were also, without exception, the moments of greatest increase. Consider also how this shows up physically, in the body itself: a tight jaw over a bill, a shallow breath before opening a banking app, shoulders climbing toward the ears at the mention of a financial conversation. These are the body's own signals of resistance, and Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the body often knows before the mind admits it. So learning to notice these small physical signals and immediately softening them unclenching the jaw, lengthening the breath, dropping the shoulders, becomes its own quiet spiritual practice, a way of teaching the whole self, body included, that ease rather than resistance is now the normal state around money. This is worth sitting with honestly, because a family pattern of struggle so often disguises itself as simple diligence, as admirable work ethic, and there is nothing wrong with genuine effort applied to a right idea, but there is a real difference between effort that flows from trust and effort that flows from fear, and only you can feel, honestly, which one is actually running underneath your own daily striving. Ask yourself, does my work feel like an expression of faith, or does it feel like an attempt to outrun a disaster I am secretly certain is coming? The answer will tell you everything. So this week, notice the moments your jaw tightens around money, your shoulders rise, your breath shortens, and in that exact moment, practice softening, practice speaking. I release resistance, supply flows to me with ease, and let your open hand, rather than your clenched fist, become the new posture your whole family finally learns from you. The ninth key is this, and it is the key that gathers up every key before it. You must finally accept your new name. Florence Scovel Shinn loved the passage in the Book of Revelation that speaks of a white stone given to the one who overcomes, a stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it, and she taught that this new name is nothing less than your true identity in the true source, the identity that was always yours beneath every inherited fear, beneath every family story, beneath every worn path your mind once walked automatically. And she taught that claiming this new name is the final, decisive act that seals every other key into place, because you can deny the old belief, you can plant new seeds daily, you can forgive your family completely, you can practice gratitude and non-resistance faithfully, and still, if you continue quietly answering to the old name underneath it all, the old identity of the struggling one, the anxious one, the one lack always seems to find, the work remains unfinished. So what does it actually mean to accept a new name? It means speaking, plainly and repeatedly, who you actually are now. Not who your family history suggested you might be, but who the true source has always known you to be. It means saying, I am no longer the one poverty visits, I am the one supply seeks out. I am no longer carrying my family's old story. I am the one who ends it and begins an entirely new one. And speaking this, not as a hopeful wish, but as a settled fact, because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the spoken word carries the full authority of whatever state it is spoken from. Spoken from doubt, it produces little. Spoken from calm, settled conviction, it produces a great deal. And she taught further that this new name must be worn the way a person wears a name they have always known was theirs, not tentatively, not apologetically, but simply and naturally, the way you answer without hesitation when someone calls the name you were given at birth. So too must you learn to answer, without hesitation, to this truer name, the one supply belongs to. Consider what it actually looks like to practice this in daily life. When a friend asks how are things going financially, the old name would answer through a sigh. Oh, you know, always something. But the new name answers plainly. Things are good. Supply always meets me. And this is not boasting. It is simply reporting truth from a settled identity, rather than performing worry out of old habit. When an unexpected expense arrives, the old name would spiral immediately into, of course, this would happen to me. But the new name pauses and says calmly, this does not shake me. I am provided for, and looks for the right idea, rather than rehearsing the old panic. Small moments like these, repeated daily, are where a new name is actually built and proven, not in one dramatic ceremony, but in 1,000 small, quiet choices to answer to the truer identity rather than the inherited one. Think back to where we began, the woman with the decree, watching envelopes stack up on a kitchen counter, absorbing a picture of scarcity long before she understood what a picture even was. And remember that the turning point for her was never a single dramatic financial windfall. It was a quiet, private moment of accepting a new name, no longer the daughter of lack, but the daughter of abundant supply. And once she began speaking from that new name consistently, every other key we have walked through together found its footing more easily. Forgiveness came more naturally once she no longer needed her family's old failures to explain her own identity. Gratitude flowed more easily once she was no longer scanning her life for evidence of the old name. Non-resistance became possible once she was no longer bracing for the old story to repeat itself. The right ideas arrived more readily once her mind was no longer clouded by the old, anxious identity straining to be heard over them. This is why Florence Scovel Shinn placed such enormous weight on this quiet, private act of self-naming, because a new name, spoken with conviction, is not a decoration on top of the work. It is the very seal that holds all the other work together. Without it, the other keys remain scattered tools. With it, they become a single, unified decree. So I want you, right now, wherever you are, to speak your new name plainly, not your old name, not the name your family history whispered over you, but the true name that has been waiting patiently underneath it this whole time. I am the one prosperity was always meant to find. Say it again if you need to. Let it settle. Feel the weight of it the way you might feel the weight of a ring slipped onto a finger for the first time. Official now, true now, yours now, because this is the decree that ends 3 generations, not through struggle, not through force, but through one person finally, quietly, decisively, accepting who they actually are. Here is the whole picture, gathered together simply. Poverty as a family pattern is never a fact about you. It is only an old, unchallenged belief that continues only as long as someone keeps signing their name to it. You break the chain first by refusing to defend the old story, then by denying its power and speaking the true replacement in its place, then by faithfully planting new thoughts in the fertile, unopinionated soil of your own mind, then by reshaping the very self-concept that decides what you are able to hold, then by becoming quiet enough to receive the right idea, rather than straining to force one, then by forgiving completely the family and the pattern that once bound you, then by multiplying whatever supply is already present through specific, spoken gratitude, then by softening your grip and trusting non-resistant ease over anxious struggle, and finally by accepting, plainly and repeatedly, the new name that was always truly yours. This is the whole ladder, and you do not need to climb it perfectly, you only need to keep climbing it faithfully. If what you have heard today has stirred something real in you, something that says, I am ready to be the one my family finally needed, I want to invite you gently into something we have built for exactly this moment. It is called the Overflow Covenant, and it is a small, devoted community walking these very principles together, week by week, with guided practices drawn directly from this kind of teaching, daily words to speak, daily seeds to plant, a place where you are not doing this quiet, decisive work of ending an old story alone, but alongside others who are also choosing, deliberately, to become the new name in their own family line. If that calls to you, look below this video for how to join us there, and know that whether you join us or simply carry these 9 keys forward on your own, the decree has already been spoken here today, and a decree spoken in faith does not return empty. So let us close together the way we began, with the words that carry the wand's true power. I am the one in whom the old story stops. Supply flows to me now and through me now. My word is my wand. Poverty ran in that family for 3 generations, and it ended, quietly, completely, the moment one woman decided her word was stronger than her history. Let yours end the same way today.